Take Command podcast from Odyssey Sports. Greg Hoffman here, Logan Paulson there. So we just talked about all this fancy data and information, Logan. How does it actually apply to the Commanders and their offense against a Giants defense where if you want to look at a bad EPA per play, if you want to look at some bad data of all kinds, go back and look at the first craptastic game that these two teams played where the Commanders scored just 7 points. How do they attack this team differently this time? Obviously, we know they've got some changes on the offensive line. The Giants also don't have Leonard Williams. You saw him last week with Seattle, so that's big helpful. Yeah. But I mean, Dallas just absolutely destroyed this Giants defense. What can the Commanders take of don'ts from their first matchup and do's from some of these other teams that have been able to put up a ton of points on New York and have a much better offensive performance on Sunday?
Yeah, I think this will be really interesting because when you look at that Dallas game, I think there's this oh my gosh, they blew the doors off Dallas or Dallas blew the doors off the Giants. But through the first quarter and quarter and a half, almost to the second quarter to halftime, it was like 7-0 for a long time. And so the Giants defense gets a 4 and out. They get a turnover. It should have been 7-7, but Tommy DeVito is like not good at quarterback. So they got a turnover return to the 15-yard line of Dallas going into score, and they couldn't get any points out of it. So I think there's this perception that obviously New York is struggling. I think that's 100% right. But when you look at the start of these games, the defense has kept them in it. And when you look at our game, the defense for sure kept them in it, right? Turnovers, lots of sacks, lots of pressures. And so that's still the defense there. And I think you bring up a great point. They're not quite as dynamic in the front without Leonard Williams there. Obviously, Dexter Lawrence had 15 pressures against the New York Jets, so he's still there. You see him just making centers' lives miserable. So he's a guy you definitely got to account for. And then you got to account for Wink Martindale's scheme. And he does a good job. He puts his guys in high leverage spots all the time, but they are number one in the NFL in free runners to the quarterback. And Sam in the first game had a really hard time with that. You know, he turned a lot of those into sacks. I think we got a new Sam Howell now, but I think this is a really good measuring stick. Like this is kind of was his kryptonite, a team that's going to pressure a lot, kind of give you confusing looks, and that's tough for a young player. So what I would say is let's make sure the protection's locked in. Let's make sure that's why Tyler Larson's playing center. Can he get this stuff ID'd? Can we get the known rushers blocked? All those types of things. That's going to be huge. Sam, know your protection rules. Know when you're hot. Know where the ball needs to go. He did a great job of that against Seattle. Seattle brought a little bit of like 4 and 5 man pressure, simulated pressures with 4, and I thought he did a great job. So this is going to be like the varsity level of that in terms of extreme pressure looks. But I think he's progressed and grown in a nice way that he'll be able to handle it. So when you look at teams that have done a good job against them, like I look at what Las Vegas did, I look at what Dallas did, and Dallas was like, we're going to spread you out. We're going to identify one-on-ones, and we're going to win with quick slants because our guys can beat press coverage, and we're going to eat. Also, I think it's important to note that game flow for this defense seems to be playing a factor. They know they're getting nothing from the offense, and so they'll be competitive for a quarter. But if you can start scoring some points, there is this kind of like, oh my gosh, here we go again. There's no way we can win this game because we as a defense can't score 14 points, right? So there's a little bit of that going on when you watch them. So I think they're still a good competitive group, if that makes sense. I don't want to give them too much credit, but
I would say this, like, it's pretty easy for almost any team in the NFL to compete for a quarter, right? Even like teams in blowouts, like you look at the third quarter sometimes and it's 0-0 or it's 3-3 and it's like, but the final score was 48-7. So, it's about at the NFL level being able to compete for 4 quarters, and the Giants just should not be able to compete with the Commanders for 4 quarters based 100%. Off the current state of the Giants. So the Commanders better uphold their part of the bargain. And so, I guess early on in the game, it probably emotionally is easier to do that, but you got to keep going. You got to put the pedal to the metal. And the Commanders have at times done a good job of scoring early this year. I think that's something that could be hugely beneficial if they could get an opening drive or 2 touchdowns and get up like they did on Atlanta, like they did, frankly, to start Seattle. Can you make those plays early? Because unlike those other teams that made it interesting late, the Giants are very unlikely to make it interesting.
And so I guess what I'm basically saying there is like, don't let them stick around. Like, don't let them do it, right? Don't give their defense hope. Like, because offensively, they don't have a lot going on. Don't give their defense hope because, like, if you look at the last game, we scored 7 points, right? The Commanders. And so that game flow is exactly what they want. They want to play field, like, if they're going to beat us, and I was thinking about this, like, what has to happen for the New York Giants to beat the Washington Commanders, just based on the talent of the roster? One is they win the field position game, right? So they get you backed up. You're punting. They're in plus field position, and they just keep you backed up. You never get anything going offensively. That's what happened in the first game, and they end up winning, right? So turnovers is another thing that allows them to stay in it, right? And this defense, they're not great. I think they're like 17th in the league in terms of takeaways or turnovers, but they do find explosive defensive plays. They get a lot of sacks, they get fumbles, they get interceptions. So don't let that happen. And if you can do that, I think the Commanders' offense is talented enough to put up 28, and if they do that, then the defense is going to quit. But if you give them hope, and it's like we're in this negative field position situation, we can't get past our own 25, we're punting a bunch, they're going to get hope and they're going to get juiced. Because if you watch the Jets game, that's essentially the game flow of the Jets game. Now, Zach Wilson is a much different player than Sam Howell, but it was 10 to 10, and they were up late. It was like it was 7 to 10 going into the overtime period. They obviously the Jets come back and kick a field goal or whatever
to tie and send it overtime. Yeah, but it was like right before that final drive. Yeah,
it was gross, and like the defense was playing with their hair on fire. And the defense is the only thing in this game, in my opinion, after watching a lot of film of them, that keeps them in it. So offensively, what are our protection rules? Let's be consistent offensively. Let's be efficient offensively, and let's score points. Like, that's really what it comes down to. Just quite literally, do your job. You should be able to. This is a little bit of a, they present an interesting dilemma from a pressure standpoint, and we saw what that can do in the first matchup. But you've seen it once. You've gotten better at handling this stuff. Let's make sure that we execute the way we know we can execute and win this football game. And you can win it with the offensive side of the football. Because if you're efficient, don't turn the football over, score a couple points, score 21 points, the game's over.
Right. I think this is a huge game for the receivers to bounce back. You watch what like CeeDee Lamb did, and specifically, like, I'm not calling out Terry McLaurin because we don't do that. That's a silly thing that radio people do, or calling out, like, that matters. Yeah. But like, I will call attention to Terry McLaurin. You watch what CeeDee Lamb does in the Dallas game, and he just absolutely wrecks the souls of the Giants defense. And of course, like, Dak's on a heater right now. Yeah. They've got some other guys that make that a little bit easier because they've got good threats, but like, Terry's got help as well. And Sam Howell's playing his best ball of his career so far, the last 3 weeks. And I think Terry's got it. And by the way, Terry's probably a little ticked at how the Banks matchup went last time because the kid's pretty mouthy, the rookie out of Maryland. So, like, go out and wreck him. Like, go out and absolutely show that you are one of the best receivers in the NFL. And I think that it's on EB to give him those opportunities. Obviously, it's on Sam to give him those opportunities, on the O-line to protect, to get those opportunities. But we were talking earlier about some of the quick game stuff and, making sure that the right guys get involved as soon as possible. Like, I think, and Sam talked about that this week at the podium. He's like, we have to get our guys involved early. I would make sure that you have some of that quick game stuff called for Terry early. I would try to get like Jahan or Curtis like a carry early. Curtis, obviously the carry options are unlimited because you can put him at running back if you want to. You can have him go an end around. But like, you see the reverse that Dallas throws to CeeDee Lamb and he scores on it. There's not just benefit in terms of those guys feeling involved and getting involved and finding the rhythm of the game. But I think when we talk about slowing down a pass rush like the Giants, obviously the number one thing you can do is get it blocked up, right? The number one thing that you can do is make sure that you're actually solid in your protection rules and execute. There's no strategy that is, execution proof, as we've become fond of saying on this show. But can you use every blade of grass side to side, make them cover a lot more space, keep that pass rush off balance, and punish some of their, and this was the thing that I think was really frustrating last time, they never were able to punish the Giants' aggression. Right. Like, okay, you want to be this super aggressive team. How do we weaponize that against you? And from the screen game to misdirection type of stuff to whatever, I do think EB, obviously, as a play caller, he's got a role in every game, but has a big role to play in helping this offense do that in a way that they did not when they scored just 7 last time.
No, I think that's exactly right. And I think when you look at the model that's been laid out by Las Vegas, laid out by Dallas, it's spread them out, spread them out. You know, like one of the things about this defensive philosophy is obviously the pressure's tough, but it's the coverage. It really leverages coverage players to a high level, and they've got a couple guys. I don't have the injury report right in front of me that are a little bit banged up right now. A couple guys with the shoulder, secondary guys, concussions, all those types of
Literally,
things.
their entire starting secondary is questionable.
Right. So if that's the case, man, like another thing you'll see is like when you're watching the Jets game, when you're watching Dallas, for example, like the coverage disguises are awesome. The blitz patterns are awesome. But one of the things that they did got that Dallas got from spreading them out a little bit was you got a little bit of time, because in those disguises, if the receiver is really wide, right, the slot receiver is really wide, the nickel's blitzing, for example, right, he's got to match the receiver to kind of disguise the blitz. And so he had to run a long way. Dak got back there, hit his step. They didn't even block the nickel, but he gets the ball out in rhythm and timing and ends up being an explosive play. So can you do that? I think that'll be a big feature. Obviously, those MAC protection stuff that they struggled with in the first game, I think you'll see those again. Because if you get those targeted correctly and efficiently, there's big plays to be had. And I think that was one of the frustrating things coming out of that film review on that Tuesday pod, was like there was opportunities and they just couldn't maximize it. So again, I think the plan will be good. I think they'll be ready to go. I think this offense will be hungry, because they were kind of embarrassed last time, you know, and I think when you look at the plan that was laid out in the first game, you say, man, if they execute this game is 28-0 in the first half, but they didn't, right? The Giants had executed them. So can you just kind of build yourself back up, say, hey, man, this is what's going to happen. We saw what happened last time. Let's make sure we hit this stuff. And I really think that's all it comes down to. I think EB in the first matchup in the first game had a good philosophy, good perspective. Let's execute that, right? Let's get that called correctly, Tyler, Sam. Let's make sure we know where to go with the football. Because quite frankly, if you do that, if you get it protected, I don't think they can match up with our receivers. And they've shown that over the last couple of weeks. If you can get it protected, those DBs are going to struggle for them, outside of Banks, who's been pretty good this year. But even he's graded in like the 50 percentile range for PFF, right, because it's just he's leveraged to the hilt every single game.
It's a little bit like what's happening to BSJ, where it's like he's a fine player, but he ain't ready to, like, he's not on CeeDee Lamb or Devontae Adams level. So if he's got to guard number ones, and this is why I go back to Terry too, like, all right, Terry, you want to be a number one guy. Right. Like, let's do it. If I was EB, like, I would probably, you know, again, I'm not going to do it as a radio host because it's a wacky bit, but if I'm EB, I'm probably challenging him a little bit. Be like, hey, man, you want it? Like, let's roll. We're going to give you some chances this week. So let's go get it. You're mad that we missed you on that deep post last week. Well, here's your chance. It's going to come back around. Right. So I think that'll be interesting to watch, but obviously the most important thing, protection, get that thing lined up. And then also, you know, obviously this was the game where Nick Gates got himself benched. Ken Tyler Larson bull up against Dexter Lawrence.
That's
the much bigger body.
We were talking about this in the first matchup, but he's literally grading at like defensive MVP level right now. Like that's how good he's been. Like
he's awesome.
He has the ability to just totally ruin a game. So probably need a plan for him when they're just rushing 4. And Tyler Larson, put your big boy pants on, because that's going to be a tough day at the office. But
yeah, get ready. But and then by the way, have fun resting up because you play again 4 days later on Thanksgiving. That sucks.